Ever heard that Kanban is just for those small, really close-knit teams?
Yeah, it's a pretty common misconception.
It is, but what if I told you that Microsoft, a company with well over 220,000 employees all over the world, successfully implemented Kanban?
Hmm.
We're diving deep today into a fascinating case
Oh,
study,
yeah.
yeah, from Kanban University, that reveals how Microsoft's XIT sustaining engineering team defied the odds and got some pretty remarkable results.
It really does challenge the idea that Kanban can't work at scale.
Yeah.
The team we're looking at was responsible for maintaining and improving a huge suite of internal IT applications, things like HR systems, payroll, all the essential tools to keep a company like Microsoft well running.
Okay, so mission critical stuff.
Absolutely.
What kind of challenges were they facing?
Well, they were grappling with the perfect storm of obstacles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for starters, they were geographically dispersed,
Okay.
with team members in Seattle and Hyderabad, India.
Right.
That's a 13-hour time difference,
Yeah,
which made real-time collaboration incredibly difficult. That sounds tough.
it was.
I can imagine communication becoming a real bottleneck.
Absolutely. And that wasn't their only problem.
Oh.
They lacked visibility into the strategic context of their work.
Huh.
They were receiving a constant stream of change requests and bug fixes,
Okay.
but with very little understanding of how these tasks connected to the broader business goals. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle without seeing the full picture. It's frustrating and inefficient.
Yeah, so they were essentially working in silos,
Right.
isolated from the bigger picture. What impact did that have on their work?
It led to a mountain of a backlog.
Wow.
They had an average lead time of 5.5 months for change requests.
5.5 months?
Can you believe that?
That's wild.
This meant that simple requests were taking almost half a year to complete,
Oh my gosh.
which obviously led to a lot of frustration and broken promises to their internal customers.
5.5 months? That's wild. It
Mm.
sounds like a recipe for disaster. It really was. And to make matters worse, they were bogged down by rigid top-down processes that were totally unsuited for virtual collaboration.
Hmm.
It was clear they needed a radical change, and that's where Kanban came in.
Okay, so before we dive into how Kanban transformed their workflow, let's take a step back. For those unfamiliar with Kanban, can you give us a quick rundown of its core principles?
Certainly. At its heart, Kanban is a visual system for managing work as it moves through a process. Think of it like a digital whiteboard, where you can track the progress of each task from start to finish. It's based on 4 key principles: visualizing your workflow, limiting work in progress, managing flow, and continuous improvement.
So visualize it, limit it, manage it, improve it.
That's it.
Sounds like a solid plan. But how does this translate into real-world practice?
Visualizing the workflow helps to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies that might otherwise go unnoticed. Limiting work in progress, or WIP, encourages teams to focus on completing tasks before starting new ones, leading to a smoother and more predictable flow of work.
That makes sense. So instead of multitasking and starting a bunch of things at once, you're prioritizing finishing what you've already started.
Exactly. It's about creating a sustainable pace of work and avoiding the chaos of too many things happening at once.
And what about managing flow?
Yeah,
Is that just about keeping things moving smoothly?
it's more than that.
Okay.
It's about actively identifying and removing obstacles that are slowing down the workflow. This could involve streamlining communication, clarifying roles and responsibilities, or finding ways to simplify complex processes.
So it's about constantly looking for ways to make things run more smoothly and efficiently.
Yes, and that ties into the 4th principle:
Yeah.
continuous improvement. Kanban encourages teams to regularly reflect on their processes, identify areas for improvement, and experiment with new ways of working. This ensures that the system is constantly evolving and adapting to meet the team's needs.
So it's not about finding the perfect solution and sticking to it rigidly, but rather embracing a mindset of ongoing learning and adaptation.
Precisely. It's a dynamic approach that empowers teams to take ownership of their workflow and continuously improve their processes. Now let's shift our focus back to Microsoft and see how they put these principles into practice.
All right, so we have this team in crisis facing these seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Then they decide to implement Kanban. What were their first steps?
Well, they knew they couldn't just force Kanban onto the team without addressing the existing concerns and anxieties, especially with a change this significant. So they adopted a strategy they called shuttle diplomacy.
Shuttle diplomacy. Sounds intriguing. What did that involve?
Instead of a formal top-down rollout, they met with stakeholders individually to explain the proposed changes, address any concerns, and ensure that everyone felt heard and valued. It was all about building trust and buy-in before making any drastic changes.
That seems like a smart move. It's about respecting people's expertise and getting them on board with the change rather than imposing it from above.
Exactly. They knew that for Kanban to be successful, they needed the team to embrace it, not resist it.
So they laid the groundwork by building trust and addressing concerns head on. What happened next? Did they just jump into using Kanban boards and calling it a day?
Not at all. They took a very strategic approach to implementing Kanban, starting with one key change that had a ripple effect throughout the entire system.
Okay.
They decided to do away with those grueling monthly planning marathons.
Wait, they got rid of monthly planning altogether? That seems risky.
It might seem that way, but hear me out. They replaced these lengthy meetings with nimble weekly replenishment meetings. These shorter, more frequent meetings allow them to adapt to changing priorities and make adjustments on the fly, rather than getting bogged down in rigid long-term plans.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. So instead of trying to predict the future a month in advance, they adopted a more agile approach that allowed them to respond to changing needs more effectively.
Precisely. It was a fundamental shift in their mindset, moving away from rigid planning and towards a more flexible and responsive system.
So they've got the team on board, they've ditched the monthly marathons for weekly check-ins. What's the next step in their Kanban journey?
One of the biggest pain points for the team was the constant need to calculate the ROI in every single request.
Yeah.
It was time-consuming and often led to delays and disagreements.
Okay.
So they decided to try something radical.
Uh-oh.
They replaced detailed ROI calculations with clear service level agreements.
I'm guessing that sped things up, but can you explain what a service level agreement is and why it was such a game changer for them?
Sure. A service level agreement, or SLA, is basically a contract between the team and its internal customers that defines the expected level of service for different types of requests. For example, an SLA might specify that bug fixes will be addressed within 24 hours, or that change requests will be completed within a certain time frame.
So it's about setting clear expectations and focusing on delivering consistent, reliable service rather than getting bogged down in complex calculations.
Exactly. Instead of spending hours debating the value of each request, they focused on creating a system that ensured timely and predictable delivery.
That seems like a much more efficient and customer-focused approach.
It is.
So we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm on the edge of my seat wanting to know, did all of this actually work?
It did. And the results were nothing short of remarkable. Remember that 5.5-month lead time?
How could I forget? It was practically etched into my brain.
Well, after implementing Kanban, they managed to slash that lead time down to just 12 days.
12 days? Are you serious?
I am.
That's incredible. But I have to ask, how is that even possible?
That's exactly what we're going to unpack after a quick break.
All right, so we're back, and before the break, you dropped a bombshell, a lead time of 12 days. That's a staggering improvement from 5.5 months, but I still can't wrap my head around how they achieved such a dramatic turnaround.
Well, it's a testament to the power of those core Kanban principles we talked about earlier. Visualize, limit, manage, improve. Remember how their workflow was practically drowning in a sea of incoming requests?
Yeah, it sounded like they were constantly being bombarded with new tasks.
Exactly. One of the first things they did was limit their work in progress. Instead of trying to juggle multiple tasks at once, they focused on completing one task before starting another.
Okay, that makes sense, but wouldn't that slow things down initially?
It might seem counterintuitive, but by focusing on finishing what they started, they actually created a much smoother and more predictable flow of work. Think about it like a highway. If everyone's trying to merge at the same time, it creates a bottleneck and everything slows to a crawl. But if you regulate the flow of traffic, you can keep things moving smoothly and efficiently.
So by limiting WIP, they essentially cleared the traffic jam in their workflow.
Precisely. It allowed them to focus on completing tasks more quickly and efficiently, which ultimately led to that dramatic reduction in lead time.
That's fascinating. It challenges the assumption that doing more at once equals faster results.
Absolutely. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Okay, so limiting WIP was key, but we can't forget about that geographical hurdle.
Right.
They still had teams spread across continents.
Yeah.
How did Kanban address that?
Remember those weekly replenishment meetings they implemented? That played a huge role in bridging the communication gap.
I'm guessing those meetings were more than just status updates.
You're right, these meetings weren't just about reporting progress, they were about actively collaborating and problem solving. The teams in Seattle and Hyderabad would come together virtually to discuss priorities, identify potential roadblocks, and make decisions together.
So these meetings became a vital communication hub for a geographically dispersed team.
Exactly. And because they were happening weekly, they could adapt to changing needs and address issues much faster than they could with their old monthly planning cycle. This meant fewer delays, less back and forth, and a much more streamlined communication process.
It sounds like they turned a potential weakness into a strength. By embracing a more frequent collaborative approach to communication, they were able to overcome the challenges of distance and time zones.
It was a brilliant example of how Kanban can facilitate effective communication, even in complex environments.
So far, we've seen how limiting WIP and implementing weekly replenishment meetings had a major impact on their workflow. But there was one other change that really stood out to me: the switch from ROI calculations to service level agreements.
Mm.
Can you elaborate on how that contributed to their success?
Absolutely remember how bogged down they were in constantly calculating the return on investment for every single request.
Yes, it sounded incredibly time consuming and a bit demoralizing for the team.
Exactly. By shifting to service level agreements, they were able to streamline their decision-making process and focus on what really mattered, delivering consistent, high-quality service to their internal customers.
So instead of debating the theoretical value of each request, they focused on creating a system that ensured timely and predictable delivery.
Precisely. SLAs help them set clear expectations with their stakeholders and establish a system for tracking their performance against those expectations. It shifted their focus from individual tasks to the overall flow of value.
It sounds like SLAs provided a framework for accountability and continuous improvement.
You got it? It allowed them to measure their success based on how well they were meeting their commitments, which in turn motivated them to find ways to improve their processes and deliver even better service.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. They limited their WIP, improved their communication, and focused on delivering consistent value, but can we quantify their success? What kind of tangible results did they achieve?
Their achievements were nothing short of extraordinary. Remember that lead time of 12 days?
Uh-huh.
That wasn't the only area where they saw dramatic improvements.
Do tell. I'm eager to hear about the rest of their success story.
Their delivery rate for change requests skyrocketed by an incredible 230%. This meant they were able to deliver significantly more value to their customers in a shorter amount of time.
That's remarkable. So they weren't just working faster, they were actually delivering more output.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality too. Their on-time performance soared to 98%, meaning they were consistently meeting their commitments and exceeding their customers' expectations.
Wow, those are some impressive numbers. It's clear that Kanban had a profound impact on their team's performance. But I'm curious about the human side of the story. What was the impact on team morale and their overall work experience?
That's a great question, and it's one of the most compelling aspects of this case study. Before Kanban, the team was struggling, demoralized, and plagued by a sense of helplessness. They were constantly putting out fires, working long hours, and feeling like they were failing to meet expectations.
It's understandable that they would feel burnt out and discouraged in that kind of environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But after implementing Kanban, something remarkable happened. The team went from feeling overwhelmed and stressed to feeling empowered and engaged. They saw their hard work paying off in tangible ways. They were delivering value, meeting their commitments, and exceeding expectations.
So Kanban wasn't just about improving processes, it was about transforming their entire work experience.
Precisely. It shifted their mindset from one of reactive firefighting to one of proactive problem-solving and continuous improvement. They felt a sense of ownership over their work and a renewed sense of purpose.
It's a powerful reminder that when people feel valued, empowered, and supported, they can achieve incredible things.
Absolutely, and it's a testament to the human-centered nature of Kanban. It's not just about tools and techniques, it's about creating a work environment where people can thrive.
So we've seen how Kanban transformed this team from a state of chaos to a model of efficiency and high performance, but how does this relate to our listeners? Is Kanban only applicable to large, complex organizations like Microsoft?
That's what we'll explore after a quick break.
We're back, and I'm really curious to unpack this idea that Kanban is only for big companies. This Microsoft story is pretty compelling, but could it work for smaller teams or even individuals?
That's the beauty of Kanban. It's incredibly adaptable.
Okay.
The principles we've been discussing can be applied to virtually any context,
Wow.
whether you're managing a software development project, planning a marketing campaign, or even tackling your personal to-do list.
So it's not just about IT departments or multinational corporations. It's really a framework for managing any type of work.
Precisely. It's about visualizing your workflow, limiting your work in progress, managing the flow of tasks, and constantly seeking ways to improve.
Right.
These principles are universal and can benefit anyone who's feeling overwhelmed or struggling to keep up with their workload.
That's encouraging to hear. It makes Kanban seem a lot more approachable. But let's be honest, even with its flexibility, some people might still be hesitant to try Kanban. It can seem like a big change, especially if you're used to traditional ways of working. What would you say to someone who's feeling intimidated by the idea of implementing Kanban?
I would say start small.
Okay.
You don't have to overhaul your entire system overnight. Pick one project, one process, even just one area of your work that feels particularly chaotic, and experiment with applying Kanban principles there.
So it's about dipping your toes in the water rather than diving headfirst into the deep end.
Exactly. You can start by simply visualizing your workflow, create a basic Kanban board using sticky notes or a digital tool, and start tracking the progress of your tasks. As you become more comfortable, you can gradually introduce other principles like limiting WIP and managing flow.
It's like learning a new language. You wouldn't expect to become fluent overnight. It takes time, practice, and a willingness to experiment.
That's a great analogy. And just like learning a language, the more you use Kanban, the more comfortable and proficient you'll become.
And I imagine there are resources available for people who want to learn more about Kanban and how to implement it effectively.
Absolutely. There are tons of books, articles, online communities, and even certified Kanban coaches who can guide you on your Kanban journey.
That's great to know. It takes away some of the mystery and makes it seem more accessible. But let's go back to the Microsoft case study for a moment. One thing that really struck me was the emphasis on continuous improvement. It wasn't just about implementing Kanban and then calling it a day.
Right.
It was about constantly seeking ways to refine their processes and make things better.
You're right. Continuous improvement is at the heart of Kanban. It's about fostering a mindset of always looking for ways to do things more efficiently, effectively, and sustainably.
All right.
The Microsoft team didn't stop with those initial changes we discussed.
Right.
They kept experimenting, tweaking, and refining their system based on what was working and what wasn't.
So it's an ongoing process, a journey rather than a destination.
Exactly, and that's what makes Kanban so powerful. It's a system that's designed to evolve and adapt along with your changing needs and circumstances.
I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners. Kanban isn't a magic bullet. It's a framework that requires active participation and a commitment to continuous learning.
I couldn't agree more. It's about embracing a mindset of experimentation, learning from your mistakes, and constantly striving to improve.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive into Kanban has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
It's challenged my preconceived notions and opened my eyes to the potential of this powerful methodology.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure sharing this case study with you and exploring the transformative power of Kanban.
And for our listeners who are feeling inspired to embark on their own Kanban adventure, remember you can find links to all the source material we used in the show notes. We've also included some additional resources to help you get started.
And if you have any questions or want to share your own experiences with Kanban, we'd love to hear from you on social media.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kanban. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving to do your best work.